Now, if I might have your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Final speaker today is Kevin Duke. Kevin is Managing Director of Duke McCaffrey Construction Consultants, based in Dublin. Kevin is a chartered quantity surveyor with over 25 years' experience, working at executive level, managing service delivery and strategic development and direction. His extensive cost and project management, procurement, due diligence and expert witness experience. This has been gained over a wide range of economic sectors on projects in Ireland, the UK and Europe, ranging in value from 100,000 up to 3 billion. Today Kevin is going to take a wide-ranging look at some of the key factors affecting the surveying profession today.
Right, I won't keep you long. Thanks for staying to listen to me. Firstly, I'd like to thank Martin for inviting me along. And secondly, I'd just like to thank the rest of the speakers for the quality and content of their presentations. I hope I don't drag the standard down. Just as a bit of background, I was also a member of the QS committee for the Society of Chartered Surveyors, and I was also the SCSI representative on the liaison committee. So I suppose I have a bit of knowledge about some of this stuff that I'm going to go through. It's a very broad range of subjects. It's going to keep it at a very, very high level. And I suppose just indulge me for a few moments while I just kind of give you a very brief introduction to Duke McCaffrey. I suppose we're established in late 2015. We're an independent range of construction consultants where we're independent of design. We offer a range of flexible services to our clients so that we can flex to suit their particular requirements, and we're focused really on delivering an excellent service to our clients. Just in terms of our services, we've got three streams: cost management, project management and consulting. Cost management is quantity surveying by another term. But I suppose we probably see ourselves as having a bit of a unique USP in terms of we actually do M&E cost management as well. So we firmly believe that as a QS, you should be looking after 100% of the cost of the project, not just 60, 70% of it. So we have a specialist expertise in M&E cost management. In terms of project management, that covers obviously the project management sphere itself, but also includes employer's agent and employer's rep. And then the consulting is really just everything else outside of that. So that would include due diligence, it would include expert witness, it would include claims assessment and dispute resolution. Just very briefly, just some of our experience. I suppose we're lucky enough in terms of we're fairly busy in the hot sectors at the moment. So things like student accommodation, residential, fit out, hotels, hospitality, retail. I suppose data centers is an unusual one to have on a list of experience, but again, that's because of our M&E experience. So I suppose it's another string to our bow. Just some of our clients. I'm not going to dwell on that. Get into the meaty bit of this presentation. So the first thing I'm going to really talk about is the RAI form of contract. So there was a new form of contract brought out on August 2017. So you have your blue form for without quants, and you have your yellow form for with quants. Why is this important? This is really the base contractual document for any traditionally procured private sector job in Ireland. So it's an important, very important document. It's the first update since 2012. So again, it's something that I suppose came out under the radar to some extent. So it's an important document to talk about. Like I say, I've already said it's the yellow form and the blue form. I mean, what I really was trying to do was to actually incorporate the requirements of the Construction Contracts Act, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. But when they were doing that, they actually took the opportunity to do, well, they actually planned 7 edits, but they've actually only incorporated 5 of them at the moment. I'll go into them in detail in a couple of seconds, but I suppose edit 4, which is related to VAT, that was postponed, whilst I think they're still having discussions with the revenue commissioners over how VAT should be dealt with. And edit 7 was just really the retention bond wording is still being discussed with the bondsmen and insurers in the industry at the moment. So Edit 1 was just the identity parties. Essentially what they've just given you the opportunity to insert the CRO number, because obviously there's a lot of development specific construction companies and development partners were established, so you're just tying down exactly who you're actually contracting with. Definition of the works. This is actually a total clauses D and E in clause, or sub-clauses D and E in clause 1 are actually totally new to the contract. So clause D describes the works. It's never been described before, but it actually gets into a lot of detail in terms of, it talks about building control, it talks about building regulations, and it also references the Code of Practice for inspecting and certifying buildings and works 2016. And it also actually refers to practical completion not being achieved until employer staff are trained in the safe use and maintenance of the particularly M&E equipment and M&E installations. So it's, again, it's unusual in terms of it's a specific reference to the works, and it's surprising that it hasn't been described before in that level of detail. Subclause E is really just talking about the Organisation of Time Working Act, which is really just referring to what are our working days, and it's related to notifications and notices under the contract. Editing or avoiding and resolving disputes. This was previously just dispute resolution. So what they've tried to change the emphasis in terms of, they're trying to make it a bit more move away from actually having disputes. So they're trying to encourage negotiation. So they're supporting the culture of negotiation. Conciliation is still retained as the primary method of resolution. It does refer to the RIA guidelines and procedures. It does also specifically reference adjudication, and again we'll come to that when we talk about the Construction Contracts Act. And then again, the whole wording has just been simplified and made much more user-friendly, much more modern in its look as well. So again, arbitration refers to the Arbitration Act 2010 and other relevant legislation. Edit 5 is really the Construction Contracts Act. It talks about the notifications. So there's a new Article 5, so that's how you deliver them. And then in the appendix to the contract, it then gives you the opportunity to insert an actual email address. So again, it's updating it, bringing it more into the modern life and modern way of doing work. So just the main changes. Article agreement, new 5th article, definitions have been amended. Clause 35 we'll come to later on in terms of the Construction Contracts Act. Clause 38, dispute resolution, again has been redrafted. Just the text has been generally updated. It's now gender neutral. There's no he's and she's. It's more gender neutral. The appendix has been changed, and then I suppose again we come to the Construction Contract Act. Previously, the references in the contract were to weeks for certificates and payments, where they're now referred to as months. So again, it's aligning with the Construction Contracts Act. The next issue I want to talk about is the Sectoral Employment Order, which was brought in October. It replaces the Registered Employment Agreement, which going back some years was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 2013. And I suppose the main reason for that was because essentially the Labour Court were setting pay rates, and they were seen as to be an unelected body, and it was seen to be unconstitutional. I suppose one of the big issues with this is the Sectoral Employment Order is actually the rates are still being set by the Labour Court. So there's a bit of confusion over the relevance and the constitutionality of this, but I suppose it's in existence at the moment. Nobody's challenged it. Nobody has the deep pockets at the moment, I suppose, to challenge it at the moment. So what it really does is sets out basic hourly rates of pay on social hours payment. It essentially imposes an obligation on construction firms now to have a pension scheme, a sick pay scheme, and a dispute resolution procedure for all of their employees. So it deals with those pay, pension, sick pay, and death in service. I suppose the employers are legally obliged to implement these recommendations. Again, the employees, it's up to them. The employer has to ensure that the employees are registered with the Construction Workers Pension Scheme, and contributions have to be paid by the employees as well as the employers. And then I suppose in terms of tendering processes, there's now going to be in the public procurement realm, there's now going to be an onus on construction companies to prove that they do have these systems and policies in place, and particularly in terms of pensions and sick pay schemes. So you're going to have for example, the CWPS will have to provide a letter of compliance, which is going to have to be put in bids and tender documents and tenders as well. So I suppose generally these are the new rates. I don't propose to go through them, but generally it's something between 8 and 10% of an increase on the previous rates. So what they're doing is they're catching up on cuts that were made back in 2012, 2013, and they're now catching up in terms of these are the new rates. The other thing is also now it's very specific in terms of the payments that has to be made to staff for unsocial hours. So if you're working from normal finish time to midnight, you get time and a half. Or midnight to normal is twice, etc. So that, again, it's all set out there. A lot of this was probably in place in any case, but it's very specific now. It actually defines it, because with the abolition of the registered employment agreement, that sort of information was no longer in a recognisable form. Again, it imposes a requirement to provide a pension scheme. So it's an occupational pension scheme. It has to be registered and regulated by the Pension Authority. It's going to be a multi-employer scheme, so there's not going to be a specific pension scheme for Joe Bloggs Construction, so it's going to be an industry-wide scheme. Because I suppose, again, what that's trying to recognise is that there's mobility. People move from job to job and from firm to firm. So again, it's spreading the pension scheme so that it's relevant to everyone, because sometimes when people move jobs, they didn't bother taking up the pension scheme, or there was a new period qualification that they had to do, minimum 2 years work with them. So it's all trying to cut out all of that sort of stuff. So again, it's age between 20 and 65. Those are the minimum contributions, retirement age. And then obviously death in service. So if you die, you get a multiple of your last annual salary. Again, the sick pay scheme is now mandatory. So it's going to be held in trust, and it has to be independently managed and administered. So again, it's very specific in terms of what the requirements are. The contributions, as you can see, are defined there as well. The one thing that they do say is that you have to get you have to be entitled to a minimum of 10 weeks under the scheme. So they can't just stop you after week 6 in terms of sick pay. So why is this of interest? I suppose it comes down to cost. You know, if you're already in a contract and you've signed it based on a particular terms and conditions, and this is a change of change in terms of employment conditions and pay that you have to pay people, can you actually recoup it? I suppose it really comes down to in RIA contracts, clause 36, generally if that's struck out, then you're not entitled to any labour or wage or material price increases. But if clause 4 is retained, you probably can look for some sort of a recoupment of the cost, because it's a new legislative enactment. Again, bespoke contracts, that will obviously depend on what way the legal eagles have drafted them. The public works contracts are a bit more complicated in terms of if you haven't signed your letter of acceptance, then you will just go back to the employer and get them to change the terms of the contract and get the cost increase included. There are PV1 and PV2 provisions in the contract, which is price variation 1 and price variation 2. I suppose the big issue there is that the references and the terminology used in those clauses don't align with the current working environment in terms of the legislation. It refers to the registered employment agreement, which doesn't exist. It also refers to the social partnership agreements, which again don't exist. So there's confusion over whether you can actually recoup the cost under the public works contract. The Government Contracts Central Contracts Committee, GCCC, they think you can't, but nobody's challenged it at the moment. But I think the biggest issue is that obviously if you haven't submitted a notice of claim under clause 10.3 within 20 working days of the 19th of October, you're probably going to be time barred. So we just talked very quickly about the Construction Contracts Act. So really what it's just trying to do was just improve the cash flow situation, particularly in terms of payments to subcontractors. So it introduced the statutory dispute resolution mechanism, which was adjudication. And it also is trying to, I suppose, speed up the whole process in terms of payments and dispute and sorting out disputes as well. Came into effect in July 2016. We've go into a little bit more detail. Essentially, it gets rid of pay when paid, which was very extensive. That clause was very extensive across all contracts in the industry. It also gives you the subcontractor an entitlement to suspend, and the contractor, sorry, an entitlement to suspend work if you don't get paid, without being seen to be determining the contract. So it doesn't apply to those particular types of contracts, so domestic dwellings, etc. I'm not going to go into that. I suppose the big thing is the parties cannot contract out of it. It's a statutory requirement, so you can't have a contract between a subcontractor and a contractor, and a client and a contractor, and a contractor that doesn't recognise the existence of the Construction Contracts Act. There is a discrepancy between the time limitations in the main contract terms and the requirements in terms of binding subcontractors, subcontract time limitations, which we'll go into now in a couple of seconds. But there is actually in existence the Quantity Surveyor's Guide to the Construction Contracts Act, which is quite good in terms of, it gives flow charts in terms of the process and how it should be, how it all should happen. So these are the payment dates, or the maximum dates that are in the Construction Contracts Act. It generally operates in a 30-day payment cycle. It's interesting that the RAI contract actually refers to a 5-day period for issuing a architect certificate and a 7-day period for actually paying the contractor. So there's a discrepancy between the Construction Contracts Act and the RAI, even though they've went to all the trouble of amending it. But I suppose these are the maximum dates, and I suppose you can always amend the dates in the RAI. They look the same. The problem is that the main subcontract timing actually starts on the first day that the subcontractor starts on site, which may not be, and definitely won't be, aligned with the main contractor employer timings. So if you can imagine on a job where you've got 20, you could have 20 subcontractors all operating on different payment cycles, and then that has to feed into the main contractor's timings as well. So it's really just creating a cash flow issue for contractors, really. It's really what it's doing. And obviously, at present, I think there's only about 2 or 3 disputes actually going through the adjudication process. So it seems to have not created as many waves as everybody was anticipating. Maybe it's because contractors have deeper pockets than they let out. I'm not sure. That's just a flow chart. It's just an extract from the SCSI guide. The right-hand side, that's life is perfect. When you start moving across the page to the left-hand side, that's where you start getting into issues and non-payment and adjudication and all that. So again, I'd refer you to the SCSI guide information pamphlet. It's good. I suppose one of the big things that the Construction Contracts Act actually came into existence in 2012. It's obviously the Construction Contract Act 2013. So why did it take 3 years for it to be implemented? It really was to enable adjudication to be validated and become a legislative requirement on the Irish construction law. And also then, following that, then the various bodies, RAI, FCS, then had to set up adjudication panels because there had to be adjudication panels in existence before they could implement the law. So it broadly follows the UK process and the UK model. The adjudication is obviously optional. You can refer to it at any time. The decision is binding in the interim, so whatever it is, and then you have to make the payment, and then you can actually then appeal it to appeal it to adjudication, and then go to arbitration if you want, and then obviously litigation ultimately. But obviously, one of the advantages is it can be running simultaneously with a conciliation, and also multiple disputes can be dealt with by the same adjudicator. So you can agree one adjudicator from a panel, and then he deals with them all as they're arising. The adjudication itself, you have to give the adjudicator the information, enough information to enable him to, within 7 days of his appointment. He then has to make a decision within 28 days. He can get a 14-day extension, but that's only in exceptional circumstances. It's a bit of an informal process, but there can be a hearing in terms of both parties, but both parties have to be in attending. And then the decision in writing, signed, dated, and the reasons for the decision, obviously, unless the parties agree that he doesn't have to give a reason for the decision. There's some smiley faces just showing the various dispute resolution methodologies available. I'm not proposing to go through them, but you can see that some of them are more expensive, some of them favour particular parties, etc. So again, it's just a nice document to just be able to refer to. So what are the implications? I suppose main contractors previously had been relying on the subcontractors' overdraft because they were paying them whenever they got paid. So that created issues in terms of payments, whereas now what's happening is main contractors are now going to have a larger capital basis, going to have better cash flow. And I suppose the final thing there is the final payment to the subcontractor has to be 30 days after final completion, whereas he could still be in negotiations and with the employer in terms of what the final account is. So again, it's a cash flow issue. So technically, you should increase tender prices. For subcontractors, it's obviously get rid of pay when paid. There's a culture change in terms of the subbies are now the main contractors are now much more dependent on the subbies. And there's obviously certainty in payment cycle, and the dispute resolution procedure is outside of the court, so again, it's quicker and cheaper. So I suppose, what it should really result in is a stronger supply chain relationship. Construction costs, tender prices. I suppose we've dealt with, Tomas has dealt with this to some extent, but that's the latest SCSI indices that came out in February, which are showing an upward trend, and it's anticipated that the trend will continue, 6 to 7% per annum going forward. This is an interesting graph in terms of it actually tracks construction input. So what you can see is that construction input hasn't really changed all that much, whereas the tender prices have fallen off a cliff edge in 2007 to 2010 and are now starting to come back up. So really, it's what has exacerbated construction is a low margin industry anyhow. You know, main contractors would generally be making a below 5% net margin. So what's happened is obviously that contractors have been swallowing to some extent the construction costs, or they've been managing to mitigate it. But now tender prices are starting to catch up, so maybe contractors might start making a bit more money. They'll never admit it. I suppose generally, what's the industry out there? There are some major issues because we lost a lot of supply chain members, and we also lost a lot of people during the recession. So things like steelwork are difficult to resource. There is a limited capacity in Ireland for steelwork, so people are having to go to the UK to talk to contractors and suppliers and get stuff in. Again, similarly with facade suppliers, a lot of them went to the UK. They're very busy over there. They're not interested in working in Ireland, or they are. If they are, then it's at a particular premium. Joinery, the number of joinery workshops that closed during the recession is astronomical. So again, there's issues with getting hold of joiners. Plastering, partitions, blockwork, brickwork. I mean, in Dublin, we're now being quoted rates of €1.10 for laying a block and €1.50 for laying a brick. So, you know, you're back to the boom time rates. There's still an issue with terms of the skilled base, and particularly in the professions and also in the construction, in the contractors side as well. So from the students' point of view coming out and qualifying in over the next few years, that should be a good news. There's still issues with plant and equipment, again, getting hold of a crane. Bad old days, everybody sold off their plant and equipment, sold off their cranes, whereas now people are having to go over to Germany to buy them, and straight from the Liebherr or whoever, the manufacturers. Site huts and welfare facilities, again, getting hold of them is an issue. Scaffolding, again, it's getting to the stage now where some contractors are actually buying scaffolding companies so they can actually have security of scaffolding. And obviously some of this is going to lead to industrial relations issues, and that's without even thinking about the Brexit and foreign exchange implications, because obviously sterling has weakened substantially. Some procurement issues. There's obviously organisational failures happening. You know, it's historically most prevalent when the market has turned. You know, we've seen Manley, we've seen Moriarty's, Carillion in the UK, Lagan Construction last week in Northern Ireland. So there are people, you know, despite the boom and what everybody sees as the boom, there are still contractors who have obviously taken on bad jobs or are losing money, and they've got issues from the past that have caught up with them, so they're still obviously failing. Cash loan credit lines, again, as we spoke about with the Construction Contracts Act and the payment terms there, that there's issues in terms of cash flow and securing credit lines. We've already spoken about the certainty of supply with contractors or subcontractors, because you can actually tender for a job using a discrete set of subcontractors, but actually when you go to, if you secure the job and then you go to actually bring them on site to say, yeah, but that was last week, it's 10% higher now, so you've got issues like that, and that's particularly with the subcontract rates. I've already spoken about the payment terms and subcontract terms. What we're finding is that partnering and frameworks and negotiation now is becoming much, much more prevalent, two-stage tenders as well. So I suppose there are issues in the industry. Construction insolvency, very quickly. What does construction insolvency result in? I suppose it results in increased costs, project delays, and third parties losing the benefit of collateral warranties. There's numerous occasions where collateral warranties haven't been signed, and then parties don't have the step-in rights to finish off jobs, etc. like that. So there's all sorts of issues like that. Some of the practical steps, you closely monitor the contractor's performance. If he starts falling behind in cash flow, then you go, what's going on here? But you don't want to overreact. Obviously, things like performance bonds and parent company guarantees, make sure they're in place. Warranties have been provided, etc. All insurances are in place. And obviously make sure if the renewal date has passed, make sure that the new ones have been put in place as well. Obviously know the contract as well in terms of what the issues are and what the possibilities are. Some of the warning signs: inflated applications, inflated variation claims, unfounded or optimistic delay, disruption, loss and expense claims, just throwing money at variations, falling behind cash flow, not recovering, claims for material deposits and off-site materials if they're exaggerated or they're over-optimistic, change in subcontractors, change in suppliers, slow down activity and don't recover the slowdown, etc. And changes in site management, site management, etc. If you see a high turnover in personnel, you should start wondering what's going on. Finally, we've spoken a lot about housing and the issues in the housing market. So I just wanted to very quickly just talk about residential construction costs. The SCSI have done some quite good work in terms of the two reports they've published. May 2016 was in terms of the house costs, and October of 2017 was in terms of apartment costs. I suppose what they both confirmed is that construction costs really isn't the largest proportion of the cost of developing. If we look here, as you can see, the actual construction cost is the top line, so house is 37% of the cost. The balance is made up of site work, site development, fees, etc. And you can see there's a large proportion for things like margin, VAT, etc. And obviously, the one that jumps out at you is land as well. So these are, I suppose, taking that across a broad spectrum of particular projects. And similarly with apartments, whilst the apartments are a bit more expensive to construct, the ratio is still not substantially different. Again, this is an extract from the SCSI. I'm not sure if you can actually read that. Sorry. I suppose what it's showing is that reality is that a lot of the apartment developments are just not viable. It costs you more to build them than what you can actually sell them for. So the orange is essentially the unviable developments. So of that group of 6, 5 of them are unviable. And I suppose what I'm trying to show here, or again, this is an extract from the SCSI report, is that there is a serious issue in terms of, if you take the grey dotted line is essentially couple's budget. So if you take an average couple's budget, assume that you're going to have to pay 10% deposit on any property, and obviously use the maximum loan-to-value rate of 3.5, the combined income. The grey line is essentially what you can afford, or what you can actually get a loan for. And you can see the blue dot is essentially what it costs you to build them, and the orange dot is essentially what you can sell them for. But the problem is that it costs you more to build them than it does actually what you can sell them for. So I think this is just highlighting that there is a fundamental issue here in the marketplace at the moment. It's not a case of salaries going up, it's a case of the on-costs on construction being looked at and something being done to reduce them, because construction cost is not the big issue here. Thank you. No problem.
So have we, Pat Neary back? Come up, Pat, now. So Pat's the winner of our competition. So we've, again, a little apology to make, because GMIT was shut last week for 2 days. The prize came by a courier on the Thursday and was taken back. I was promised it this afternoon, but it hasn't shown up. So I'm going to present Pat with this jiffy bag of GMIT prospectus. I promise in front of witnesses that as soon as I get the iPad, it'll come on to you. So we might get, say, Kevin and Matty. Yeah, so just one announcement. Those of you that wanted CPD certificates are available when we finish just outside the door here. I'll now just ask Gerard McNichol, Head of School of Engineering, just to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I won't keep you long. I really just want to offer a vote of thanks to people who have participated in this conference. But given that I'm here, let me talk a little bit. The ecology of this conference is most important. It's not just a conference, it's not just a forum for people to actually come and trade and exchange their ideas, their experiences, which is the primary aim of the conference. But there are a lot of other purposes for all the other stakeholders involved. We've heard today, for example, of issues associated with planning, flooding, digitalization in BIM, new technologies, the public contracts, and the old perennial of this conference is, where is the industry? Where are we? What's the situation with respect? Have we bottomed out yet? Or are we growing? Are we there yet? So it's very reassuring year after year to hear that the industry is prospering and shaping up as a completely different sector prior to the collapse of the economy. It's also an opportunity and a forum for people in the informal space associated with the conference to, again, trade ideas and exchange experiences, to benchmark where they are, who's doing what, what's happening. And that's vital. That informal, tacit knowledge of the sector is absolutely vital. Just as it is, if you're a student, you want to know, how do I pass that subject? Do I have to attend all the classes? And so on. That's the analog of that public space, that forum for meeting and exchanging opinions and ideas. Then there's also the speakers themselves and what they have to say, the practitioners, the professionals. In a very formal way, this is important in GMIT because this allows us to say that we have engaged with the sector. But we've done more than that. We've created a West of Ireland construction calendar event that is now most definitely on the calendar because people expect it, and we're happy to continue to provide this forum. I learned yesterday that it's actually always on a Tuesday, just like Shrove Tuesday is. So that is something for your calendar. And then, as you can see, if you look around you, there are lots of students. They've rapidly disappeared, of course, but for them it's a learning experience as well, and we have learned how to use opportunities like this to incorporate into the curriculum and become a learning experience for them. They're also here, of course, to hear about the trends and developments in the sector, to listen to the practitioners and the experts. And for them, that's a vindication of the quality of their own course, because they in turn expect that to be reflected in the curriculum and to hear the same sorts of things from their lecturers. So it's very important to lecturers also to be here, because they meet you, the sector. It's people, rather than economic activity, that actually constitute all reality in the human experience. So to meet you is most important, and to actually hear about what's happening in the industry. And a lot of what they hear is incorporated into the development of their curriculum or into their teaching, or becomes a case study or whatever. And that's so important. They also have more authority with respect to their students, because their students understand that they're fully engaged with the sector. And there's another dimension, of course, that we've pioneered in the Building and Civil Engineering Department, and that relates to research in the sector. We've quite a large number of people presently doing PhDs, and we have a number with PhDs who have pioneered research in the built environment in the west of Ireland, outside of the civil engineering space, in construction, lean technologies, waste, recyclables, policies, methodologies, and so on. And coming to such a conference inspires and gives them more opportunity to do more research, and to also hear that some of the things that they worked on a few years ago are now standard practice. So that's very important for our lecturers. And just continuing the theme of the ecology, our graduates are important people as well, because they constitute those people in the sector. And we're proud and happy that we've got high quality programs producing graduates that are very much sought after in the sector. Our graduates over the last few years have become speakers at this conference. And yet again this year we had two. I'll actually mention them specifically. We had Ursula Dreadall and Oliver Madden, respectively, from Stewart's and CRH. So in a sense we've come of age as a department of the built environment in building and civil engineering, with our programs which are fully aligned to the professional and the professional body requirements in the sector, and that our own graduates are also up here addressing us about developments and innovations in the construction sector. So I think we've come of age. I hope you agree with me on that, in that respect, and that you'll continue to come most certainly next year as well. It just remains then for me to thank you for coming. You were the first stakeholder I mentioned, the audience, and I hope that you found the experience useful in terms of those ideas, innovations and experiences. I want to thank our students for their patience and actually sustaining themselves for most of the day here. That is important, that ability to persist. And I want to thank the organisers of the conference, particularly Martin Taggart, whose idea this conference was in terms of innovation. And he has kept it going through lean times, not just externally, but internally here in GMIT, and his colleagues who have supported him all the way through this. And Mary Rogers, the head of the department, who has ensured that all the bureaucratic impediments available to us in GMIT weren't present, or at least she minimized them. And then our exhibitors and our sponsors. They're also very much part of the ecology of this conference. I want to thank all of those people. They have presented stands and contribute to the financially to the viability of the conference. We've had stands on new technologies. This year, recruitment was a feature, which is a vindication of what some people at the conference were saying here today about skill shortages, and that they thought it was worthwhile coming here and getting value for the day that it cost them to come here in terms of recruitment. So I'd like to thank our sponsors and exhibitors as well. So just remains for me to say safe home on those motorways that you have helped to contribute to the design of and the construction of. Thank you very much then.